Hello everyone. In this video clip, I will give you a brief introduction of the so-called two-way graphs in Stata. With the command two-way, you can combine multiple graphs within a same plotting area. I am not going to discuss the details about how you produce each of the individual graphs, and the main purpose of the video is to illustrate the functionality of the command two-way and to give you some inspirations. So it is better that you try something yourself afterwards. But what I will try to cover is about some points that you need to watch out when drawing the two-way graphs. And for the plots I have shown in this video, you can also find the relevant codes in the download link below this video. Okay, now let's look at what do I mean by saying combining graphs. So what I am going to do now is to show you some examples that you will often encounter in your courses and perhaps also in your future work. The functionality of two-way is to combine different plots. And for each of the single basic plot, you can think, for instance, a scatter plot, a line plot, a bar chart, etc. But in many cases, we do have the need to combine multiple graphs in order to deliver a message in a better and a clearer sense. So for instance, in the data set, you may have two different groups. And of course, you can draw two separated scatter plots to illustrate the patterns within each of the group. But you can also combine these two scatter plots together, and that will make the life easier to compare the similarity and the differences in between the groups. And for a single scatter plot, we would often see that it is combined with a linear fitted curve to highlight the relationship between the x and the y variables. You would also encounter the graphs like this with fitted curves from multiple different models. That is useful to compare the different models and to evaluate whether they are value added by allowing for nonlinearity, or the simple linear fitted curve is good enough. And sometimes people are also interested in a so-called bubble plot. The bubble plot is actually still a scatter plot, but the area of the circle will represent the weight of each observation. So for instance, if you think of a regression across countries, then you would like to sometimes attach a higher importance to big countries like China and America rather than, say, Cyprus and Andorra. And graphically, this is what you do with the bubble plot. And similarly as the simple scatter plot, you can also combine the bubble plot with the fitted curve from a weighted regression. And in empirical analysis, we also sometimes need to check the distribution of certain variables. This can be done graphically with the help of histogram, but you can also do a so-called kernel density plot. And it is not uncommon that people would combine the two. And these kind of combined graphs can be also easily made using the two-way functionality. And when you are working, it is actually very possible that you will have to deal with the graphs that are much higher in the complexity. Say if you will get a very high-paid job after your study, the following candlestick plot might be your daily life, because this is the industrial standard for the finance world. In most cases, your company will have dedicated software that automatically gives you even nicer plots, but with the two-way functionality, it is also possible that you make these things yourself inside Stata. So if you look into the single candlestick, it actually gives the information about a trade within a day. Each candle is a combination of two basic plots. The bar plot in the middle gives the opening and closing prices of the day, whereas the range plot, that is the vertical line, gives the highest and the lowest prices that has ever been reached. If you get a green candle, that means the share price has increased in the day, but watch out that if you will work in Asia, the meaning of red and green are actually reversed, and we use red to represent an increase. And of course, there is another functionality of two-way. That is, you can draw some auxiliary lines and make some notes inside the plotting area. So here you see, for instance, the share price of New York has already decreased even before the 9/11 instance. Now we look at the grammar of the two-way command. The basic grammar is not difficult. If you know the graphs that to be combined with, then what you will do is to start with Twoway and then just put the commands of each individual plot inside a bracket. But in order to control the behavior of the plot, you often need to add additional options. And then the thing you need to watch out is the position where an option should be added. There are two kinds of options, and the first kind controls for the behavior of each individual plot. For this kind of options, you will need to put it inside the bracket of the respective plot itself. For example, for a line plot or a fitted curve, it can be the color and the pattern of the line. And for a scatter plot, you can use options to control for the shape and the color of the marker. So here you see that it is made into a cross in the color of blue. Sometimes you will also have the labels in the scatter plot, and you can also control for the color, font, and the positioning of the label. But all above are the options corresponding to each individual plot. So the option of a scatter should not affect the behavior of the fitted curve. So the relevant option should be added inside the bracket of the particular plot itself. And we have another kind of options that will affect the behavior of the whole plotting canvas. And sometimes we call them as global options because they will affect everyone. These options should be put in the very end after all the brackets of single plots. For instance, we know that all these plots inside a two-way graph will share the same x and y axis, so the titles and the labels of the two axes are global options and therefore should be defined in the very end of the two-way command. It is also the case for the title of a graph and for the legend. And among the global options, we may also think of the so-called aspect ratio, that is about the overall shape of the graph, whether it is squared or a wide screen. And when you are working, sometimes your company will have their own templates for graphs. So these styles are usually the design work by artists. So everything should look more professional rather than the default setting in Stata. But if you have already these templates, it is possible to use a single global option called scheme that will change the outlook of the graph. So here you see that I make the candle plot into a more professional outlook that is closer to the real life. In Stata, the traditional way of work is to set the options using commands in text.
Order received.
But recently, the new version of Stata has improved its functionality to make our life easier. And in addition to the command and conquer style of adding options by commands, you can also make use of the graph editor. There are plenty of opportunities to make improvements by clicking the mouse. To enable the graph editor, click this button in the graph window. And then you can explore yourself by clicking around and to see what kind of things can be changed. For instance, you can change the text in the title, change the size, and then drag it to another position. And I can also change the scatter dots, and from dots to say cross, and make them larger. And for this fitted curve, I would like to change the color and make it into the dash. So you see, this is the outcome. And just click around and have a lot of fun. There is another thing I want to show here, which is about the covering of different plots. Similarly as drawing on a piece of paper, if you have multiple plots in a same graph, then the earlier plots might be covered up by the new plots. And in Stata, the command Twoway has a very simple rule that it is going to draw the plots one by one, given by the sequence of the brackets from left to right. So to illustrate the issue of graphic covering more intuitively, let's consider the following example of Super Mario, and I made this in PowerPoint. So what I have done is to split the background image into two parts. The left part stays in the background, but I move the right part in the foreground, namely put the right part up front. Then I put the image of Mario in between the two layers, and to show it more clearly, this is what I have done. So in terms of two-way commands in Stata, it would be written in this way. And now if I add the animation of PowerPoint and make Mario moving from left to right, and this is what you get.
It's me, Mario!
And similarly, you can also make Mario getting into the pipe. Of course, we are not using Stata to do any animation, and if I can afford a better laptop, I also don't want to use PowerPoint. But the message here I want to say is that we do need to take into consideration the graphic covering when we are going to make the two-way graphs. It can be used creatively. So back to the candlestick plot, it looks like a candle, but the candle is actually first made by drawing the vertical line representing the range of the highest and lowest prices, and then add a bar on top of it representing the opening and closing prices. If you do it in the opposite sequence, then this is what you would get, and clearly it's strange. To have another example, if you would like to show the histogram together with the kernel density plot for a distribution, then it is better to first draw the histogram, the bars, and then make the kernel density plot. If you do it in the opposite sequence, and you see that the curve is being covered by the bars, and it looks strange. So there is no fixed rules about what you should put up front and what you should put in the background. What you need to do is to try out different combinations and to see which sequence gives the best outcome that gives a clear information and in a comfortable way. So this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a nice day.